The AI Chef's Apprentice by Jonathan Welling. Welber stood nervously outside the huge kitchen doors with Chef GPT beside him. Above them, a giant spinning wheel hung on the door, showing the kingdom's great leaders.
But I don't know anything about what magical creatures like to eat. What if I pick the wrong flavors?
Welber worried.
Well, then they'll just eat you instead,
The chef said nonchalantly, but noticing Welber's horrified expression, quickly added, pointed to the massive doors in front of them.
That's why we have our large language model kitchen inside. It holds thousands of recipes, cooking tricks, and food secrets from everywhere in the kingdom. You'll learn to work with this amazing kitchen.
The chef continued.
By the end, you'll know how to cook for anyone.
The chef smiled and pushed open the glowing doors.
Ready to begin?
Welber, with shoulders slumped and only a half smile, followed behind. Welber walked into the magical kitchen and his mouth dropped open. Tiny gnomes were everywhere, chopping, stirring, and singing while they cooked.
This is our neural network,
said Chef.
All the gnomes work together like one big brain. But this isn't just any neural network.
The chef explained proudly.
This is a special type called a transformer kitchen. In old neural network kitchens, gnomes had to pass messages in order, one gnome to another. But our transformer gnomes are much smarter. They can talk directly to any gnome they need instantly.
Welber saw a sauce gnome checking with the spice gnome, timer gnome, and taste tester gnome all at the same time.
This is so cool,
Welber blurted out.
It's like each gnome is a neuron, and together they make this amazing thinking network.
Chef GPT led Welber to a magical chart floating in the air.
Every dish goes through different layers, like floors in our gnome tower,
he said, pointing to 3 glowing levels.
The bottom layer gnomes do prep work, the middle layer gnomes do the cooking, and the top layer gnomes do the fancy plate decorating,
the chef explained.
This is deep learning magic,
Chef added with excitement.
We use many layers of gnomes, each learning different skills and building on what the layer below learned. The more layers we have, the more complex and amazing dishes we can create. But not all layers are equally important for every dish,
the chef continued.
We use weights to decide which layer matters most. Making soup, the cooking layer gets the heaviest weight. Making salad, the prep layer is weighted most important.
Welber watched as different layers of gnomes lit up with bright or dim glows, depending on what dish was being made. The brighter the glow, the more important that layer was.
See how the parameters change too?
Chef pointed to dials and settings around each layer.
Temperature controls, timing wheels, seasoning amounts. The gnomes can adjust all these settings to make each dish perfect.
Welber nodded excitedly.
So, the deep layers work together, but some are more important for different recipes. But how do the gnomes know which flavors work together?
Welber asked, watching gnomes expertly combine ingredients. Chef smiled mysteriously.
Follow me to see the most magical part.
He led Welber to a shimmering, invisible space above the kitchen.
This is our latent space, the secret flavor map that only gnomes can see.
Chef waved his hand and suddenly Welber could see it too, a floating map with glowing dots scattered across it.
Every recipe lives somewhere on this map,
Chef explained.
See how strawberry shortcake sits here?
He pointed to a dot surrounded by sweet flavors, creamy textures, and fruity tastes.
All the parameters and weights from our layers work together to put each dish in exactly the right spot. Similar flavors cluster together. All the chocolate desserts are over there, spicy dishes are grouped here, and fresh salads live in that corner.
Chef continued. Welber watched in amazement as recipe dots moved closer together when they shared similar flavors.
So when gnomes create new recipes, they can see where it belongs on the invisible map.
Exactly. The map helps them understand which ingredients will work together, even for dishes they've never made before.
Before working in our special kitchen, all gnomes went through pre-training.
Chef explained proudly. They studied a whole library of cookbooks and tasted dishes from every kingdom.
Welber watched gnomes confidently working with ingredients he'd never seen before.
They know so much.
Additionally, at every step, our gnomes use activation functions.
Chef continued.
These are like checkpoints. Each gnome asks, "Is this ready for the next step?" If yes, they pass it along. If no, they work on it more.
Welber watched a prep gnome taste test a sauce. The gnome's hat glowed green, and he passed the sauce forward. Another gnome tasted undercooked bread. His hat flashed red, and he placed it back in the oven.
Try it yourself,
Chef encouraged. Welber dipped a spoon into some soup and made a funny face at the bland taste.
Your activation function just told you it needs more seasoning,
Laughed Chef. Welber smiled, amazed by how much the gnomes knew from their massive training. Now let's learn how to understand recipes like the gnomes do,
Chef announced, showing Welber a long, complicated recipe scroll.
Welber stared at the overwhelming text.
This is so confusing. How do I even start?
That's where tokenization comes in,
Chef explained.
Big recipes are too hard to learn all at once. Watch.
He waved his hand and the recipe broke apart into colorful pieces.
Sauté oignon until golden brown becomes separate tokens. Sauté plus onions plus until plus golden plus brown. Each piece you can understand and practice.
Welber watched as more recipes split into manageable chunks, each word glowing a different color.
But here's the real magic, embedding.
Chef picked up a tomato.
When you see the token tomato, your chef brain needs to understand everything about it. Acidic, sweet when ripe, breaks down with heat, pairs with basil, adds umami richness.
Welber held different ingredients, trying to think beyond just their names. An onion wasn't just the word onion. It was makes you cry, sweet when slow cooked, sharp when raw, adds depth to everything.
Perfect!
Chef beamed.
Now you're learning to break down information and understand deep meanings, just like our gnomes.
Time for your first forward pass,
Chef Algo announced, handing Welber a recipe scroll. Give this mystical mushroom stew recipe to the gnomes and watch them process it from start to finish.
Welber handed the recipe to the gnome kitchen. The gnomes processed it through their layers. Prep gnomes, cooking gnomes, plating gnomes. But the result was a disaster. The stew was too salty, the vegetables were mushy, and nothing looked appetizing.
I'm in big trouble.
Welber groaned.
Don't worry. This is perfect for learning.
Chef Algo said, taking a bite.
Now we use our loss function. We measure exactly how far your dish is from perfect. Too salty by 3 points. Overcooked vegetables by 5 points. Wrong color by 2 points.
Magical numbers appeared above the failed dish, showing all the problems clearly.
Now comes the detective work.
Chef Algo continued.
We use backpropagation to trace backwards and find what went wrong.
They followed the cooking trail backwards like detectives.
Too salty because you added salt twice, because the prep gnomes didn't communicate with seasoning gnomes, because timing was off from the very beginning.
So we can find exactly where each mistake happened,
Welber said excitedly.
Exactly. Loss function shows what's wrong. Backpropagation shows where it went wrong.
Chef Algo smiled proudly. Now comes the patient part,
Chef said. We use gradient descent. You'll get better through tiny adjustments over many tries.
All day long, Welber practiced the same recipe over and over, making small changes each time. A little less salt, cook vegetables 30 seconds less, add spices earlier. After many attempts, Welber felt frustrated.
My cooking is getting better, but it's still so basic and boring. I think I have underfitting. I haven't learned enough technique to make anything truly delicious.
Chef nodded.
You're using cooking rules that are too simple. Keep practicing.
By the end of the week, Welber finally mastered one perfect mushroom stew. But when he tried to make it with different mushrooms, different pots, or on a humid day, it turned out terrible.
Now you have the opposite problem. Overfitting.
Chef chuckled.
You've learned this one specific recipe so perfectly that you can't adapt when anything changes. Real chefs need flexibility.
Welber groaned.
First I was too simple, now I'm too specific.
Don't worry. This is exactly how learning works. You're finding the perfect balance through gradient descent. Soon you'll cook well in any situation,
You need to develop attention.
Chef announced. A master chef must focus on the most important things while cooking multiple dishes.
Welber watched Chef GPT manage 6 pans at once, shifting his focus like a magical spotlight. Intense attention on the delicate sauce that could break in seconds. Casual monitoring of the bread that just needed to bake quietly. Welber practiced this magical focusing ability, learning to prioritize what needed immediate care versus what could wait. The gnomes helped by showing him which tasks were most critical at each moment.
Perfect! Now it's time for fine-tuning.
Chef continued excitedly.
You've learned general cooking through all that pre-training and practice. Now specialize for your mythical creature challenge.
Chef showed Welber detailed scrolls about each creature's preferences.
The dragon loves fiery, bold flavors, while the griffin prefers elegant, refined dishes.
What about the Sphinx?
Asked Welber.
I don't see much data about him.
The wise sphinx wants food that represents deep thought and reflection.
Answered GPT.
But to be honest, I'd hope you don't get him. No one has ever found his preferred meal.
Welber began adapting his general cooking knowledge specifically for each possibility, learning to make the same base stew spicy for the dragon, delicate for the griffin, or fire-charred for the phoenix. Now for the final step, reinforcement learning.
Chef announced, bringing in other apprentices to taste Welber's practice dishes.
Too spicy for the phoenix.
Said one taster.
Perfect for the griffin.
Praised another.
The Leviathan needs more sea flavors.
After each round of feedback, Welber adjusted his recipes. Positive reactions meant keep it. Negative reactions meant change it. Day by day, his cooking improved based on their responses.
You're learning from every response.
Chef smiled.
Good feedback tells you what to keep. Bad feedback tells you what to change.
By the end of the week, Welber's dishes were getting consistently positive reactions. The apprentices were smiling, giving thumbs up, and asking for seconds. Welber stood up confidently, wiping his hands on his apron.
Chef GPT, I think I'm ready. I've learned to work with the gnomes, understand all their magical systems, and cook for any creature. Bring on the challenge.
Chef beamed with pride.
Then let's see which mythical leader you'll be cooking for.
It's time.
Chef announced, leading Welber to the glowing wheel. Spin to discover which mythical leader you'll cook for.
Welber grabbed the wheel and gave it a mighty spin. Round and round it went. Hydra, Griffin, Phoenix, Leviathan, Dragon, before slowly coming to a stop on the Sphinx. Both Welber and Chef's faces went pale.
Oh no,
Chef whispered. Suddenly, a deep, booming voice echoed through the kingdom.
Welber, I await my meal of wisdom.
The Sphinx.
Welber trembled. How do you cook wisdom? What does that even mean?
Chef GPT looked worried.
The Sphinx is the most challenging of all creatures. It doesn't just want food. It wants a meal that represents deep knowledge gained through self-reflection and understanding.
Welber panicked, his mind racing.
How do you cook wisdom? This is impossible.
He paced back and forth, then slowly stopped.
But wait, the gnomes taught me their entire magical system. Maybe if I trust everything I've learned and use it all together, maybe we can make this work.
He rushed to the gnome kitchen.
Gnomes, we need to adjust our weights. The most important elements for wisdom are balance, complexity, and layers of meaning.
The gnomes began shifting their focus, making the deep philosophical ingredients more important than simple flavors.
Now we use gradient descent.
Wellbear called out.
Small adjustments until we get the perfect wisdom combination.
He tasted and adjusted, tasted and adjusted. When something didn't work, Wellbear used backpropagation.
This flavor is too simple because we added sweetness too early, because we didn't prepare the base properly. Focus your attention on the most meaningful ingredients.
The gnomes concentrated their magical spotlights on ancient spices and thoughtful preparations. Finally, Wellbear fine-tuned every parameter, temperature, timing, seasoning, until everything was perfect. Trembling but determined, Wellbear carried his creation toward the massive gates.
I'm ready,
he whispered, and pushed them open to face the waiting Sphinx. The massive gates opened to reveal the majestic Sphinx, its golden eyes gleaming with ancient intelligence.
Show me wisdom, young chef.
It rumbled. Wellbear stepped forward, trembling, and placed his creation before the great creature. On a perfectly polished silver platter sat 5 crystal-clear cubes, each one transparent as glass, reflecting the Sphinx's face like mirrors.
What is this?
the Sphinx asked, intrigued. Wisdom,
Wellbear said, his voice growing stronger.
Each cube is completely honest, sweet, sour, bitter, savory, and salty. Nothing hidden, nothing pretending to be what it's not. Just truth.
The Sphinx carefully picked up a cube, seeing its own reflection through it in the silver plate below. As it ate, its eyes widened with understanding.
When you eat from your own reflection,
Wellbear explained,
you taste your own sweetness, your own bitterness. You realize that you, yourself, are a masterpiece, full of all kinds of flavors that make something wonderful.
The Sphinx smiled, a tear glistening in its ancient eye.
True wisdom indeed, young chef. You have learned that the greatest knowledge is understanding yourself, all your flavors, all your complexity.
Chef GPT burst through the gates.
Wellbear, you did it. You used everything, the neural network, the learning, the understanding, to create something truly wise.
Wellbear beamed, finally understanding what it meant to be a master chef.